The Leventhal Artist Fund of the Columbus Jewish Foundation was established in 1996 by me and my wife, Beth Aaron Leventhal, to support artists, programs, and services. This year, I've begun a new video project to document the lives, artistic, and community contributions of Columbus Jewish artists. For the first video, Danny and I will profile artist, author, educator, and community activist Mimi Chenfeld. I will conduct the interview, and my daughter Danny Leventhal Restack, visual artist and associate professor at The Ohio State University, will capture her story on video.
I'll tell you a story about my mom and the gypsy. My favorite story. So the gypsy caravan came through every single year to Romania, to Harlow, and they parked outside the village or the town, whatever it was. And they stayed for, I guess, a couple of weeks. It was an annual event. They would come through. I guess they sharpened knives. They did a lot of work, but they also did some mischief. And so one day my mom, who was still a little girl, maybe she was 6, I don't know, 6 or 7, she disappeared. And of course the whole town, including a lot of the relatives who all lived there, uncles and aunts, and the whole town was looking for my mother because she's only a little girl. Where could she be? And she ended up being in the gypsy caravan community. That was this temporary community, and she ended up being there the whole day. I guess they took her. They saw her on the street or something. They picked her up and they took her. And so, of course, when they finally found her, my God, So I say to my mom, how was it? Tell me, because I really love the culture of the, we don't call them gypsies now, we call them Roma. The Roma, I love the Romas. I mean, I would join a Roma community now if I could. So when I heard that she was taken over, Mom, I'm 50 years old when I hear the story. Mom, tell me all about it. What happened? What was? Well, first they took my earrings. All little girls had little gold earrings when born in Romania. That was just a tradition. They took my earrings. I said, well, what else? They were very nice to me. They were very. And what do you remember? I didn't like their food. Here's my mother with this adventure, and all she thinks of, she didn't like their food. I said, Mom, I wish you had stayed there. I would have loved to be part of a gypsy family. So we had a lot of the relatives didn't make it to America. Some of them made it. They call them the landsmen, the Romanian landsmen. And of course, we lived all over New York City. We lived in the Bronx. My mother said we lived in Brooklyn, but I do not remember that. And then we ended up in Manhattan. So, we were little nomads traveling around the city, but they knew all the Romanian relatives. So at birthdays, at parties, at some holidays, celebrations, they would all be there. Loved, if they were there were some fun dances. They would put like handkerchiefs on the floor in front of them. And I guess if you danced and stopped at a handkerchief, you danced with that. I mean, there were a lot of little customs but you're a kid, you don't know it's anything special. It's just the way it is. So that was a really enriching part of our lives. Some of them were incredible. My folks helped a lot of them come from Romania because the Romanian government didn't want to let the Jews go. And they didn't want to let professional Jews, like if you're an accountant or a doctor, they wouldn't let you go. Now we're talking like what, the 50s, the 60s, but there were still folks left there. And so they said, finally, the Romanian government said, if you pay us $5,000, we'll let this person go. So that all the Romanians in the city, everybody chipped in so that they got a lot of them out. And it was amazing to have them in your life.
So, Mim, you've told us about your childhood and your parents. Tell us a little bit about your high school years and what was going on with your brother, sister, and life in high school.
My sister is 2 years younger than I am, Laura, and my brother is 7 years younger, Michael. And we're all very close and moved a lot. And when I was 16, the folks moved from New York City to Long Island, which I thought was awful and terrible and didn't want to go. And then of course they went in your senior year. In those days, parents didn't even realize you take a kid who's about to be a senior and you move. It didn't even occur to them. It wasn't that they were mean. It just wasn't in the culture to think of. So I was going into my senior year in Long Island, very involved. I was involved in the senior scouts. I was involved in the community center, did volunteer work. Very always kids work. I don't think I've ever had a job that didn't involve children except for 2 weeks of my life. And that was in Cedarhurst when 2 weeks I worked for, what was a candy store? Oh my God, a very famous candy store. I worked there for 2 weeks and then got fired. So that's why I went into education for the rest of my life. But anyway, so very involved, danced, sang, was in theater. I wrote a column for the high school paper there, a political column about, all the issues that I cared about. Civil rights was at the beginning of talking about discrimination, bullying. Hello, it could be today. And then at that time, nobody went out of town to go to school. We never knew anyone who went away. I did. One friend went to Connecticut. I was like, oh my God, she's going to Connecticut, to go to college. So that was like the other side of the world. So Hofstra was in Hempstead. It was a college then, a new college. And it was right after the Korean War, so the whole college wasn't ready for the GIs coming. It was all in Quonset huts. And it was a very interesting time because you had the GIs there for the GI Bill of Goods, the GI, the benefits. And yeah, and I'll take a drink. No, I'll wait for a drink. Yeah. Anyway, and at Hofstra, I was very involved. I was in the literature, the literary magazine, poetry. I was in the theater group. I was in the group that was fighting against McCarthy. It was during the McCarthy years. We had a fierce group that, as a matter of fact, one day we were driving home from school and I heard a radio news guy, probably was the precursor for Fox News. Do the parents of the students of Hofstra College realize that they are supporting the communists? I'm like, screw that. Boy, that only got us more activated. So we protested, and it was very active time, writing and dancing. And I started in the first Israeli folk dance group in Long Island at Hillel. There's no such thing. And I had gone to a weekend this is soon after Israel became a state. So this is like 52. Israel became a state in 48. And dance, and the whole Israeli culture was very big. And I learned about 4 Israeli dances. And I said, I love them, but who can I do them with? So I started a group at Hillel. It was the first Israeli dance group in the island. And we performed like the 5 little chutzpah people. But then it became a big group, yeah. So that was college. I loved it. I absolutely loved college.
So, Mim, you're completing time at Hofstra, and you're thinking about what else am I going to now do with my life? What did you start doing with your life?
Well, I'm still at Hofstra, though, and I fall in love with, of course, I'm dancing. with the Israeli dancers for years and learning more and more and more. And then realizing that I would love to take modern dance was sort of new at the time, not new in the dance world, but new in the outer world. And they had some modern dance classes at Hofstra. And I said, I've got to take them. So I fell in love with that, but always loved choreography. And my sister and I just grew up doing choreography in the living room with Harry Belafonte songs, take this hammer and carry the doctor. So I just loved it and took all the modern that they had, loved it. And then I married and we went to live in Albany, New York, because my husband was working for the state of New York. And I finished my senior year, I finished college there, and with a degree in sociology, but decided I was not going to go into sociology, I was going to education. And at that time, they had massive demand for teachers. So I actually ended up taking 3 years with State University of New York at Oneonta, and they had the classes in Albany. And I took those classes, but I was also teaching at the same time. So they gave you temporary license the first year, and if you stayed with it and did all the courses, you got another one. If you were okay. So I ended up getting my master's and teaching. Started with 4th grade, then went to 5th grade. But at the same time, I was also dancing like mad. And we had a modern dance group that we started called the Capital Area Modern Dance Council. And we had wonderful group dancing, mostly in Schenectady, which is right near Albany. And we brought the top folk dancers, modern dancers to the area. We applied, the 5 of us around a table for Days of Creation, said, how can we get all these wonderful dances that only the people in New York know? And this new guy, Alvin Ailey, and all these other, and Paul, I keep thinking Paul Simon, and all these fabulous dances, but we can't get them. Nobody knows about them. So we wrote a proposal to the State Arts Council for a grant to bring a concert, and they gave us 4 grants to bring 4 major concerts. None of us knew anything about this.
Wow.
We almost had a heart attack. We went, you weren't in the picture, then I would have called you to arrange it because you're the big arranger of events. So we ended up with the years sponsoring these major concerts and also performing. We had our own group that performed. This is not the Israeli, we had an Israeli group too. So I was involved.
And this is essentially the 60s?
Yeah, this is all the 60s.
The 60s?
Yeah.
Prior to coming in 1970?
Yeah, this is the 60s.
And you had married?
Yeah.
And
Willis, my husband.
Yeah, but you had 2 children. You had
the boys. Yeah.
Why don't you just talk about the boys?
Oh,
It'd be a good time.
I lost my husband in 1966. The boys were 6 and 4. Cliff and Dan, awesome kids, awesome, and it was a time that we don't need to talk about it. It was a time, but the kids are great. We lived in Hawaii for a year, 1967, 68, something like that. And I taught there. I taught Upward Bound. I worked with street kids. I did Israeli dance. I taught Israeli dancing. We choreographed a major dance thing that went around the islands at Israeli and called the Yemenite Suite. We performed it with the dance department. And Hawaii was great. The boys were great. I came back to Albany because my brother came and visited us. Everybody visits you when you live in Hawaii. And he said, Mimi, please go back to New York because I think I'm going to be sent to Vietnam. And it was the most unselfish thing I ever did in my life. And he'll never hear the end of it. And he was sent to Vietnam. And I was back in New York because my folks would have freaked out if no one was around because my sister was already in California. So a year later, I married Howie Chenfeld, and how little daughter Kara joined our family, and we have a wonderful family of 3 children, and we moved to Columbus because Harry was in the shoe business.
Share something about all the books that you've written about the arts and how they integrate it into education.
I was teaching school and just doing what I always did, which is just music, movement, stories with the kids. And something happened at one that I was presenting at a teacher's workshop, and they said, "You should write that up." I went, "Why? What's so different about it?" I didn't realize. So I wrote up the first article, which was in about 45 years ago, whatever. I can't think of the name of it. I'll think of it. Oh yeah, no, the article. This was an article, not the book. And it got published. And everybody thought, wow, this is so cool. It was about kids and movement and humor. And I'm like, why is it so? So then because of that article, I was at the Jewish Center working with the kids. I got called to go to Kalamazoo, Michigan, to do a presentation because of the article. So then I said, this is wild, It's like somebody's giving you an article for The Sky Is Up. But anyway, so that led to traveling around the country a lot, writing many more articles. Most of the articles about creative education and integrating the arts. And then it ended up with, not ended, but I said, and I've always been teaching creative writing. I shouldn't say teaching, it's sharing creative writing in many venues. And so I had a manuscript poem, What's So Orange About 2 o'clock, which is about the way I teach creative writing. And I sent it out to Harcourt Brace Jovanovich, and they called me and said, we're not going to use this because it's good for everyone, and ours is just college text, but would you do a book on creative language arts, a textbook? And I'm like, what? I don't want to write a textbook, but I ended up writing this textbook, which is pretty good, called Teaching Language Arts Creatively. I was in Canada, I was in Puerto Rico. Where else was I? I was in England.
Would you speak to sometimes hundreds of people at a time?
Oh yeah.
Even thousands sometimes?
Yeah, sometimes if it's the keynote for a state conference. I was very lucky to just get around, to the places, and I wrote many articles in early childhood about teachers. Mostly teachers told me stories that were fabulous, and I go, you need to write this up. And so no, we don't want to write it up, no. If you want to write it, you can. I'm like, hell, I don't want to write anymore. I like to write fiction. I like to write poetry, and I'm ending up writing a lot on integrated, creative ways of teaching, using joy, using fun, using love. So that's all my articles are about that.
So it's amazing, Mim. In a period of 10, 15 years, you wrote creative activities for young children, teaching in the key of life, teaching language arts creatively, still teaching in the key of life, joyful stories for early childhood settings, teaching by heart. Wow. Bim, bam, bim, bam, biddy, biddy, bam, bam, biddy, bim, bam, bim, bam, shh. Bim, bam, biddy, biddy, bam, bam, biddy, bim, bam, bim, bam, shh. Bim, bam, biddy, biddy, bam, bam, biddy, bim, bam, bim, bam, shh. Bim, bam, biddy, biddy, bam, bam, biddy, bim, bam, bim, bam, shh. Bim, bam, bam, biddy, biddy, bam, bam, biddy, bim, bam, bim, bam, shh. Bim, bam, biddy, biddy, bam, bam, biddy, bim, bam, bim, bam, shh. Bim, bam, biddy, biddy, bam, biddy, bam, biddy, bim, bam, bim, bam, shh. The curious thing of all, ma'am, out of nowhere, you wind up doing something that led to some tremendous honors and exposure. So tell us the story on how the House of 12 Rose Street came to be.
That's a really, really important story, because I was teaching, this is in the 57. This is 1957. And it was just as the civil rights movement was sort of in its first seeds of becoming something. It wasn't something yet, but it was beginning because there was so much injustice, there was so much segregation, and there was so much racism that it had to boil into Martin Luther King. But at that time, it hadn't been there yet. And I'm teaching 5th grade in Albany, New York, and the curriculum is American history. So when and the kids are reading the paper, they're hearing the news every day. There were incidents that were so ugly, that were so mean, that was really hard to teach. So I said, you know what, let's find a book, because it's easier to get a book with a story in it and talk about the issues than say, what's your, experience? Because then it's like, oh no, I don't want to talk about myself or whatever. So there was no book. There was not one book on anything that had to do with kids, racism, prejudice, bullying, nothing, zero. So I lived in Albany and I went to the state library because the state library was there. And I went to the state children's librarian because it was right in the city. And I went in and I said, I'm looking and looking for some books of real issues that kids are facing, but I couldn't find any. And she said this exact words. She said, there are no books on anything controversial for children. And I freaked the F out. I couldn't believe. I said, what are you talking about? And she said, no publisher will publish anything, quote, controversial or realistic for children. So all the books about kids living on farms, nothing about cities, nothing. Anyway, so the minute that happened, I said, what is it that nobody wants? I'm going to write it. That's exactly what I said. I'm writing one. But at that time, I couldn't when you're real upset, you can't write. Or I can't write. And so I knew I wanted to write a book for the kids about something that was going on that would help them. So at that time, Levittown, Pennsylvania, which was one of the first big housing communities in the country, Levittown, had an incident where a black family moved into the neighborhood, which was all white, and they were mean, they were ugly, it was awful. And I was so upset I couldn't deal with it. And about a year later, there was a article in Look magazine that said, Levittown, Pennsylvania, 8 months later or something. And they interviewed people, their faces in the magazine, and how they felt about this. And one person whose name I never wrote down, and I should have, wrote and said, when the new family moved in, I do what I always do. I welcome them. The minute I saw that, the whole book came into my head, The House at 12 Rose Street. So it's about the family next door to a black family. It's not the black family, it's the white family. And so, but at that time, the real estate people were steering. They were panic selling all over the country. They were doing really vicious things in housing, and there were people who were putting signs up, this house is not for sale, because realtors were knocking on doors. It was a terrible time. I got all that in the story. So then I sent the book out for 9 years, and every publisher said, this is a good story, but we are not in the market for this kind of book yet. I went from the A's to the Z's to the W, because there were no Z's. And then sending it out, every time it came back, I went and sent it out again. I kept saying, and then the first publisher who rejected it took it, because the time had changed. Now it's suddenly, oh no, we need realistic books for children. So I didn't feel good about it. I felt that for 10 years, nobody could get a book published that would mean something to the kids. I don't just mean mine, I mean anybody's. So they took it and they published it. It got really good reviews. It went into paperback. And actually, Sidney Poitier's daughter read it and wanted to do a movie based on it, which they did. I had nothing to do with the movie. And they even got an Emmy nomination. And it was a really good story for kids. And went into the school readers.
So now we moved to Columbus, Ohio in 1970. I'm walking around Berwick. We're moving around Berwick, which I didn't realize was in the middle of housing crisis because of integration, because there were African American families moving into Berwick, and the real estate people were having a feast. They were knocking on every door saying your property values are going to go down, so you better sell. That's what they call panic selling. But we didn't realize it. So I'm taking a walk with my dogs in Berwick. We just moved there. I see a sign in a house that says, "This house is not for sale. We love our house." I'm like, what? So I knocked on the door. I said, "Why is this sign in your house?" She said, "The realtors are eating up the neighborhood. People are panicking and moving. And so some people are just," so that's how I found out that Berwick was in the middle of it. So I wrote this giant letter to the Board of Realtors, and I told them, "You're steering, and it's against the law, you're illegal, you're a bunch of shits," I didn't quite use those words. But anyway, and we are reporting you to the State Civil Rights Commission. And I got a letter back, and when I got people to sign it, so it wasn't just from me, it was like from residents. We sent it out, and they sent back, "Please do not go to the state. We will self-discipline our members." And they said, and because of that, they said Berwick is off limits to the realtors, because they were steering people away. Like if you're black, they were steering you to Berwick. If you're white, they were steering you away. So that's how Berwick, which is today still a wonderful, diverse community.
So what was the organization that got formed to deal
it was
with this?
The Berwick Civic Association came out of that.
And you were an active member of that.
Oh, yeah.
And the whole idea was to stabilize the black and white populations. And 30 years later, it's still happening, right?
Berwick is now a solid, integrated, diverse, fabulous community. But it took a lot to people moved like mad. They moved to play. The thing I love the most is some people moved to Gahanna, which nobody knew. What the hell is Gahanna? Those were early years. They were there, but nobody, like New Albany was a farm town. And then I read in the paper this year, the most diverse suburb in Columbus is Gahanna.
I understand that you spent a lot of years working with people over at the Ohio State Penitentiary. Tell us how you got involved.
How much of our lives is steered by just incidents or momentary decisions, and then it changes your life. So I had a folk dance group at Johnson Park Middle School for 20 years. And I had kids, and we had a big, fabulous group of really problem kids that would scare the heck out of everybody. Like Johnson Park Middle School, all those kids, I'm like, they were great. We had like 50, 60 kids a year in my group, and we danced everywhere. So we danced at one of the festivals, and folk dance, it was all folk dancing. And afterwards, this woman came up and said, "Mimi, do you think your kids could dance at the Ohio State Penitentiary?" And I was like, "Oh, why not?" So we got permission from the school, from the families and the kids, and we made a date. And we were set to go, and she called me at the last minute, and she was very upset, the woman, Winona Hamilton. And she and her husband had started this group called Prison Concern, which brought regular citizens into the prison, like once a month or twice a month, to just be with prisoners, talk to them, be an outside, relationship, so they could feel that they were not just isolated forever, just as a human contact. So she said that this prison just called her and said the kids were not allowed to come. It was a court case that closed the prisons. This was one of the issues, that they always promised the guys something special, and at the last minute they canceled it. So it was a constant promise, betrayal, promise, just as part of the cruelty. So I said, oh, I feel so badly because, and then she said, but they didn't say you couldn't come. And I'm like, oh my God, what does that mean? This is still records. This is before even cassette tapes. So I said, oh, whenever in doubt, just say, oh. I said, oh, uh-huh. They said, well, it's Friday night. Can you come and bring your music and dance with the prisoners? I went, I think they were expecting a big group of kids in a big group. So I get there and there's about 50 guys, who are permitted to be there for the prison concern night. And I'm saying, well, and they said, where's your group? I said, well, just pretend I'm a group. They said, but let's dance. So they're like, what? So this is, it's folk dancing, so we have to make a big circle. And it was pretty hilarious. They like, hold hands. What? Hold hands. So we danced that first night, and they thought it was hilarious and funny and like, what the hell? Just be quiet with it. Anyway, so I said bye to them, and they went, aren't you coming back? And I'm like, oh my God. Oh, well, yeah, well, let's see if I can. So for 10 years. But we didn't dance all the time after that. After that first dancing time, I was just part of the group.
So, Mim, beside being this incredible artist that you are and giving talks all over the country on the arts and education and the like, you've had quite a life raising 3 children.
Fabulous children.
Right in the camera and tell us about, start with Cliffy and work down to Cara.
All right, I have the 3 children, Cliff, Dan, and Cara. So Cliff is the oldest, and he's strong, clear, energetic, curious, adventurous. He could be a debater. He started law school. He became a lawyer, and soon after that, he decided he's going to the music business with his friend, and he started a company from nothing, from a bridge table in their apartment in New York City, and he and his partner both were at NYU Law School together, and he called his company. They made up a company, and they named it Razor and Tie Music. Cara, who's an incredibly gifted artist and very organized, very competent, very scary. She's scary because she can like organize your life. And it's a gift, which I don't have. Anyway, she married Jim, who's a glass blower, fabulous glass blower, James Wilbat. And she has a job doing something I don't quite understand, but she's also has a job full time doing all he does is blow the glass and travel to art fairs, and she does everything else. And Danny Boy just is my child who reached great heights in the skydiving field. And he is just known, he's known up there. He's not known on Earth, but all the skydivers in the world know him. And so that's my Danny Boy.
So you're blessed. How many children altogether?
7 phenomenal grandchildren and 3 awesome children. Whatever money I have goes into airfare.
And they're constantly, the grandkids, sending things to Bubby?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Mimser.
Mim, you were involved for years, decades, with some Jewish organizations in Columbus. Just share some of your involvement with them.
Well, we moved here in 1970, and I started at the JC that year. And that time, of course, the early childhood program was nothing like it is today, because today we start as 6-week-old kids and go to pre-K. And then it was like, 3 and 4-year-olds, and that was it. But I started with them with movement and stories and music. And then I started the second week that we moved to Columbus at Hillel with the folk dancers. And I have been there with them ever since. And we're dancing this weekend at ComFest.
What are some of the things that you specifically were involved with? Like Beth Tikva, what are some of the projects or things they would call up Mim and say, Mim, we want you to get involved with some things?
Well, one is for sure is BREAD, the organization BREAD that's working on societal issues that needs solutions. And it's been it's only by congregation, the membership, and Beth Tikva is one of the members. So I'm part of that BREAD group, which is awesome. And then I teach folk dancing every year to the Sunday school kids, not every single week, but through the year. So we've been doing that for years. And, the study groups and as many services I can get to. So, I'm not a good member, but I'm a nice member who loves it.
But I think we both have something in common. It's a progressive, reform synagogue that is open to everybody.
Yes,
everybody.
Very warm and loving and interesting.
And the same thing, Mim. What are some of the special projects over the years at the Jewish Center working with kids that you've been involved with?
Well, I can't even think of special projects because if you see them every single week for 50 years and dance with them and sing, what we do is not product. We're not going, and now here's a concert, so get your little tutu or your 3-3. And and you're only 1 year old, sometimes you sign up for I'm going to sign my child up for ballet. She's 1.5 years old. I think it's time. And then when you sign them up, they go, May 16th is our recital. And the kid is not even out of diapers. But we don't do anything like that. We just have a joyful time. And that's what we do there. And that's special to me. But I did do stuff with Gallery Players at the Jewish Center. Gallery Players is a theater group, and I was lucky enough to work with Harold Eisenstein, who is an incredible director of Gallery Players and director of plays. And you remember Harold Eisenstein? Sure. And he asked me to choreograph about 6 shows for them, which was one of the joys of my life.
Let's hear about this long relationship that you've had with Michael Rosen.
Oh, Michael. My Michael, I can't even begin to tell you about him. He is just so awesome. We became friends when we moved to Columbus, as he was my next door. The Rosens were our next door neighbors. And Michael was 16 or something like that. And I knew when he was 16 that he was a genius. And he never failed me being a genius. He's a wonderful artist. He's a wonderful writer. He's had about 130 books published. He's a poet who's had poetry published and has read poetry everywhere. He's a phenomenal visual artist, collages and illustrations, and a presenter. So we've gone back, and we're still the dearest of friends.
And tell how important he was to the Thurber House.
Oh, he was the first literary director of the Thurber House, and he was unbelievable. He brought to the Thurber House probably the biggest literary figures in the country over the years. He started the garden readings with the guests. He started the newsletter. That was wonderful. He really did an absolutely wonderful job bringing the Thurber Center to life.
So I want to turn to something that's part of my heart and soul. And thank you for reaching out to you. I was leaving Ohio State Hillel after 10 years and trying to figure out what I wanted to do.
When you grew up.
When I grew up. And I was right then at that time. We're talking about 1980. I'm 40 years old, and I had gotten a master's in recreation and parks administration in Indiana university. I wanted to really be involved in owning and running a camp. I found out it's just so expensive to do, but I came to you and I said, Mim, next summer, I'm going to have my children with me. I want to put together something around the arts. The uniqueness of my idea would be we're not going to use teachers. We're going to use all professional artists, and let's get together. And then you said, let's bring Phil Boyarsky, the poet. And we sat down that winter, and you can just talk about your 30 years with Days of Creation.
God. Well, it's funny that Aaron had a lot of ideas after he was leaving Hillel, which you don't remember. And you would call me and say, what do you think of this idea? And I go, and then he'd go, what do you think of this idea? I don't think it. And when he came up with this idea, it was like, yes. So our first camp was called 7 Days of Creation. Remember? The first year. And Aaron had a friend, a minister, who had a camping ground.
Lloyd Whitey.
And he gave us the camp for 1 week. It was 7 Days of Creation then, but we had to change it because some people thought it was like a religious camp because of the 7 days. I said, oh, sure. So that's what we call it Days of Creation, Arts for Kids. And then we were at that camp about 2 or 3 summers.
I did it for 7, and then the artists ran it from then on.
No, I mean, we were at Whitey's campsite.
Yeah, we were there for about 3 years or so. We started using Camp Akita,
right,
and we took it to recreation and park centers.
And then we did schools and centers, and we did festivals. And it was one of the most, we see people to this day who said, I was in Days of Creation. But it was the joy of the doing.
Sheer just the incredible people that kept it alive. It was totally run by artists. Oh, yeah. The whole program. Yeah. Just mention some of the people that you work with.
Kay Boyarsky.
Emil, remember Emil Hassan?
Emil out in California now. Leslie Zach. I mean, Phil Boyarsky, Larry Hamill. I mean, we had wonderful, wonderful people.
Londa.
Oh my gosh, Londa Brunetto. Thank you for reminding me.
Terry.
Yeah, we had
Yasue.
Oh my gosh. We had a roster of one, but the point about that is we didn't just want artists. Yes, we wanted artists, but artists who could work with kids. We had a lot of artists who said, oh, we'd like to work with Days of Creation, and we would invite them to one of our events, whether it was at camp, whether it was at a school, whether it was at a center, and just let them go and see how they worked. And you could see the very first day, this is not going to work. And we didn't say it's because of your art. Your art is wonderful, but we didn't even think they would enjoy because we were all process. We were not product. And we did things for their own joyful self. That's why I think it took on so long, for so many years. At that time, hardly any summer programs had the arts. They had softball, basketball, soccer, and they had the color wars and whatever. But ours was just art. You come here, you do art, and you swim. It was a joyful celebration of the arts for kids without worrying, am I doing it right, or is this wrong, or do I get a good grade? So it was that kind of little city of refuge for the children. And we went on for 30 years. And by then, a lot of the camps had added art as an offering in the camp curriculum. But I think nobody could touch what we were doing because we didn't have a schedule. And it's like, okay, change groups. It's now 3:00, and I'm in the middle of creating David in marble, and you're telling me, Michelangelo, just stop right now. You've got to go to, puppetry.
So then the next thing I'm thanking you for, Mim, it's 1983. We started in 1980. And every year after we had the kids for a number of weeks, we used to do it 3, 4, 5 weeks, Days of Creation, different weeks. We're taking unbelievable material that we would work on with the kids. And we're loading up bags of trash, and we're seeing beautiful pictures
That's Kay.
and writing
Kay
and
Bureski.
poetry. And I said to Mim, we're going to create a magazine only with kids' work.
All your ideas have cost me a lot of years.
We're going to call it Kids Connection Magazine.
Yeah.
And just talk about it, because it went for 17 years. Tell the people on the board.
Yeah, people on the board.
That we had a little board of artists that would look at every kid's work.
That's what we did. He started Days of Creation magazine and invited works by kids, their poems, their stories, their articles. And then he needed some folks to be on the editorial board to read all of the incoming materials. So hello. I think that's all I did for you.
Mimi Chenfeld, you were on it for 17 years. Phil Boyarsky, the poet.
Larry.
And we had Larry Hamill, the photographer. Ellen Zach, the photographer. Yeah, right. And then we had floating people, artists here and there that would come and look at this material. And we'd work it down from piles of stuff and all the way down in one line meeting. And this should be on the cover. And we'd fight for, no, this is a better cover. We had a great time with that magazine. We did it twice a year, and we put thousands out all over the city.
Almost 20 years you did.
Yeah, 17 years.
It was a lot of fun. Kids liked it very much.
I see that you were an instructor at Otterbein in Columbus State. What was that about?
Well, at Otterbein was about 10 years teaching a summer course called Arts Across the Curriculum, which is for teachers and art and education students to see how the arts connect to every single curriculum area. And if you don't have the arts collecting, it's going to be hard to make those classes enriched and exciting for the students. So I taught that, and then I went to Columbus Community College 11 years ago, and I do my session about every quarter called Playing with the Arts. And a lot of them are early childhood people, but I just love being with them. I love it.
I spent a lot of years with artists in the schools. What's that program about? What do you do?
That program was unbelievable. It was phenomenal. It was sponsored by the Greater Columbus Arts Council. They're probably still doing, but not to the extent that those years. And if you were on their catalog, which you couldn't just go, hi, put me on the catalog. Guess they checked you out. Then they sent it out to all the schools in the area, not just Columbus, but all of them, and said, like, if you want Danny to do she does a video workshops with the kids, or Aaron does a recreational workshop, or Mimi does integrated art. They call you and they say, please come to our school and for a day or for a week. So the residencies were all different depending on the school. And I went to almost every school in the county. So I had a great time because I just did only what I love to do. If you go to a high school, the kids have stayed up all night figuring out ways to show you they're not excited. But if you work with early childhood kids, you just go, boys and girls, I'm excited. They go, we're excited too. Why are you? I don't know. We're excited because you're excited. That's what it is. Stick with the little ones.
Ma'am, when you're not working and writing, teaching, and volunteering, what hobbies do you have?
Well, some of the hobbies I don't have are cleaning, shopping, laundry, responsible, practical thing. I don't know. Those are my hobbies and my life. Music, movement, dancing, poetry, walking, l'chaim.
So I'd like to just thank you for this time together with you. You are kicking off what hopefully will become a really major project for the Columbus Jewish community to recognize outstanding Jewish artists, their contribution to the arts, and to life in Columbus. And I think it's a wonderful story that I read in one of the articles about you, that they ask you, well, you get these awards all over the country, internationally, nationally, locally, regionally. What particular award was like so special for you?
Well, I have two. The dearest one is a little boy wrote and said, "Mimi, you're the queen of fun." And I think that to me was like the dearest thing anybody could say. And then I got a letter from a kid, which is the funniest one ever. And he wrote, "Dear Mimi, thank you for coming to our school today. I had fun even if nobody else did." I love that one.